Good morning.
Good morning.
Did you have a nice night?
Oh, I did tell her.
Yeah.
Some people might be groggy.
I was hoping. Thanks for all being here at this time. I'm going to give you a talk that I gave 10 years ago, and we'll see how it goes. So it was requested that I give this talk, so you're getting vintage slides, I guess, if 10 years counts as vintage. So first, I would like you to all hold up your phones really quickly. Great. Some of you held them up more quickly than others. Some of you are more reluctant. Oh, but no, not in this room. So all of you held up your phones. You're all cyborgs. And you do not need to be Terminator or RoboCop to be a cyborg. You just need to use a piece of technology. It doesn't need to be embedded into your body every time you're using a tool as an extension of your brain, or a hammer as an extension of your fist, or a knife as an extension of your teeth. You're acting as a cyborg. And people think that cyborg came from science fiction, but it didn't. It actually came from a 1960 paper on space travel, in which exogenous components are added to human beings for the purpose of adapting to new ambient spaces. Somebody in a spacesuit. We are really strange creatures. We can put on flippers and go scuba diving, and we can put on a helicopter as an external exoskeleton and fly to the top of Mount Everest the next day. We evolve outside of ourselves, and that's one of the reasons why we're such curious creatures. There are other creatures that evolve outside of themselves. There are creatures that make dams. There are crows that drop nuts from the tops of power lines and they break them apart. But because we've worked as this collective and evolved alongside of our tools, we have created this human tool symbiosis where our tools create us and we create our tools. And there's been something that's been quite different that's happened over time. First, we had these tools as extensions of our physical selves. But then we started with cave painting and other kind of mental extensions to extend our mental selves in different ways. But the difference between how this looks and acts and feels is that this digital tool is fundamentally unstable. When you look at the hammer, it still looks, acts, feels as a human extension of ourselves, pretty similar to how it did 2 million years ago. But only just since the 1950s, we have computers that have taken up the size of gymnasiums, and now they're compressed into a smaller and smaller thing. This unstable media inside the device, the actual form factor, is fundamentally different. So if a traditional anthropologist, for better or for worse, goes to other countries and has the anthropological other, how curious these people are, how interesting their kinship is, how bizarre they are. Look, they're naked. Like, let's take this back to our first world country and put them on display. Then you miss how strange we are. How we have these things in our pockets that cry, and we have to pick them up and soothe them back to sleep. How if we don't take care of them or upgrade them, they turn against us. How we wake up next to them and look at them before our significant others. And how we fall asleep to them and have them soothe us to sleep. So as Cyborg Anthropology says, look at how weird we are. Look at how strange we are in an industrial society in which things are not necessarily made at human scale anymore. Look at our kinship that's a symbiosis of humans and machines. How our social networks are a bunch of tiny bots aiding us to connect to each other because we've been spread apart great distances with the development of cars and suburban sprawl and large highways. In the 40s and 50s, we had these things called the Macy meetings, which are pretty much forgotten. But they were really crucial because it was anthropologists and technologists coming together to talk about the future of technology. They said, look at these things. Look at these giant machines. One day they might fit in our pockets. One day they might be smaller. How will that warp our culture? If it was just technologists and cyberneticists in these meetings, or just technologists, just pure technologists like we have right now, we would have the same thoughts. Oh, one day we'll automate everything. But because there were anthropologists there, they were looking at how it might affect culture. And since then, we have forgotten this really crucial idea of cybernetics. Cybernetics is the idea that you have a feedback loop, that it's not just a human doing everything, and it's not just a machine doing everything. It's the human working alongside the machine, helping the machine, or the machine helping the human. And in that feedback loop, you have something that's better than a single individual and better than an entire AI. And because we forgot this, we're trying to make things that are all human, like let's just ignore all tech and we'll just be a Luddite, or we're on the other extreme where let's automate everything and that'll be better. And so because we've forgotten this, we can't really improve our technology in the way that we could if we still had the arts merged with the sciences and the anthropologists making technology alongside the technologists. I'll give you an example. This person named Lucy Suchman was an anthropologist in the 60s and 70s, and Xerox PARC, which made all these printers, was making these super-powered machines. They were beautiful, they had all these buttons on them. All of these technologists were building them, and they said, you know, if you're a technologist and you want to hang out with your tech, you're going to make a powerful tool with all the buttons so that you can press anything and do anything from the front. It was a triumph. But Lucy Suchman realized that most people did not want to be the printer operator as a job. You know, you had a specially trained woman who would do that for their entire job because it was so complex. The printer would sit in the corner. It would be loud. So Lucy said, look, most people just want to walk up to the printer copier and press a button and make a copy. And that's where the big green button came from. You could have hired 10,000 engineers, and they would have all said, let's just add more buttons. People need more control. But the anthropologist said, people don't want to have the primary task in their lives be technology. They want to be human. They want to go home to their kids and have dinner. And they want to be able to walk up to a machine, press the button and do most of the task, and then get the job done. So what happened? We forgot a lot of this, and then this subsection of anthropology called Cyborg Anthropology showed up as it's an anthropology of science subsection. It said, let's consider a kind of actor network in which there are humans and tools collaborating with each other. So let's think of technology as a non-human species. And when we think of technology, people talk about AI will be better than humans, or AI needs to be like a human, or we're going to make computers in the shape of humans. Do we expect a dog to act like a human? No. We like the dog and amplify what the dog does well. Dogs like to fetch. Dogs like to hunt truffles. Pigs are kind of better at that, right? We do not try to make the dog act like a human. And we do, when we do, the dog gets depressed. All those chihuahuas. So how do we do a good job? We stop trying to make computers act like humans, and we amplify the best of each. Computers are good at certain things. Humans are good at certain things. Let's meld them together at the points in which they can aid each other and stop trying to make something that does something better than what we have learned to do. We think that AI can understand us better than we do, but we don't barely even understand each other. So let's talk about the present day. And I'm sorry, the mic is giving this weird poppy crackly. Can we try and fix that? I don't know if we can fix that. Has this been happening all day? You haven't been here for that. So you're used to it. Okay. All right. Wonder what it is. All right. So present day. We basically have Mary Poppins bags in our pockets, and we're carrying them around. And you know when somebody hoards cats and newspapers, it's considered a mental issue? Yet we hoard newspaper articles and photos of cats on our phone. And unlike a house, which all of the data and newspapers and cats take up space. When we hoard into our phones, there's no space. Yet when we lose it all, we feel this sense of loss, even though we barely look at our digital photos because it's so easy to take all of them. Cutwater did this campaign for Maxtor, the hard drive company, and they said, let's take 8 years of digital photos and print them out and see what happens if you lose a hard drive. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting back in 2009 to do an artist residency where I would think about Egyptian wall carvings and how a pharaoh would have their entire life written about the mundane things that happened. We got 3 bales of wheat. There was an argument. We went to the king's birthday party, Babylonian, the whole translator thing. So I printed out my Facebook wall the size of a wall. All of my personal private data. And I thought, now everybody has one of these, but it's stored in nothingness, and it means nothing, and everyone's got one. So if it all crashes, does it mean anything? When I was introduced, there was a mention of the indie web. The independent web is all about making your own website, archiving your own data, owning it first, and then sending it out to social networks. So that way you have a record of everything you've done. I've been obsessed with this. I have a record of everything I've done since the age of 4, including floppy disks, video archives, media, tapes, notebooks. Does this really matter? No, fundamentally, no, it doesn't matter. But it feels good to have this instead of this. I still have these, so I'm going to do a retrospective and print out my Facebook wall now, which is full of negative, horrifying things and ad revenue, versus this, which was super silly. 2009, it was a fun time to be on Facebook. And I think one of the things is when your hard drive fails, you kind of have all these hyperlinked memories that, you know, when you go into your email and you try to remember the thing that you're supposed to do and you try to remember the keyword to search for, but then you get hit with all these other emails, and so you forget about it, because it's kind of like a paleontological dig site where there's more and more layers of dust and bones accreting all the time, and you have to dig through it with these specialized tools. There's a great app called, for Gmail, it's like a plugin called Inbox When Ready. It hides your inbox. It gives you the search bar and the compose feature. So you don't see anything until you're ready. Then you click the button and you can see your new email. I basically leave this on by default because I hate digging through this site to go and get all of the information because I keep getting distracted by all these things. And then when you add all of the different things that are happening at the same time, Twitter and Facebook and chat, you can, this dates the presentation because there's AIM. But you have all these things going at once, and all these different time zones that your friends are living in socially, or your coworkers, are all cascading on you, interrupting your sense of real time. And that leads to a kind of social punctuation. This was a Foursquare party at South by Southwest where people are checking into the party on Foursquare while at the Foursquare party instead of talking to each other. And when you add all of it up, you get a kind of architecture of panic. This was my inbox after I gave a TED Talk, and it was horrifying. And I went through most of those emails. But when you have everything be the same size and shape and text color, everything, including spam, and the lame email that means nothing, seems just as important as the really important email. And you can kind of think of like in nature, if you were to walk into a forest clearing and there were a bunch of wild animals staring at you, you would feel a sense of panic. And Lisa Reichelt has this idea called email apnea. She noticed that people hold their breath when they look at their email. That they're so arrested by the idea of all of these things weighing on them, they just stop breathing. And so if you can take a breath and look in your email, or when you wake up in the morning, just keep your phone on airplane mode, wake up, spend a half an hour or an hour, write down a list of items to do, and then procedurally do something about them before the computer tells you what to do. It could help this email apnea. But we also have this ability at any point in time to be attached to anybody. I remember hearing a story of this woman who went to Japan, but then learned that her mom died. And she was in a foreign country and there was nobody around that she knew, but she had this little social network in her pocket that if she printed it out, it would probably look like this, if you're Swedish. And because she was embraced by all these people that were far away, and there's a little bit of dopamine that happened, she felt it was okay. She felt at home. There's been research that's been done lately that says if your mom texts you, you have to have, 10 to 100 texts to create the same amount of dopamine of a simple 5 or 10 second phone call. That the text, you have to just have so much more to replicate that. That's why I often just call people. If they text me more than 5 times in a couple minutes, I just call them up. Okay, they're available. I'm going to talk to you. We're going to figure this out right now. And I try to call my mom to make sure that I get that dopamine. You can get the same with a FaceTime video, even more, because there's more resolution. But what text removes, which we try to add back with emojis, is that 80%, sound of somebody's voice. And then when you do call, just smile while you talk to people. It's so funny because people will just be stressed out. I'll be on these phone calls with 11 or 12 people, and I'll just call up with a giant smile on my face. Nobody can see it. But it just calms everybody down, and then we can have our meeting, which is only 15 minutes long anyway. Yet, modern society has given us these kind of non-places. And non-places are where you don't have any relation, identity, or history. A traffic jam, a supermarket, an airport. They're in-between places full of throwaway time. And in order to get back that sense of identity, relation, and history, we turn to our devices. They don't give us the full thing of living in a small city or a village or walking down the street and knowing people for the last 30 years. But they give us something to get out of that frozen moment in time. One of the reasons why, maybe the only reason I live in Portland is because in the 1970s, if you know Robert Moses, who did all these highway projects in New York in the 30s and 40s, he made the killer app for the highway. He said, I'm going to make this highway that goes to a little ocean front. But you can't go on public transportation, and you can't go on foot. You have to have a car to get to this special beach. So people started buying cars because they want to be seen at this beach. He was responsible for tearing down lots and lots of ethnic neighborhoods, putting in these giant highways. And out of 1,000 highway projects slated for the United States, only 12 did not get built. And I think 9 of those were in Portland, Oregon. So when the 90s came around and we started to see consolidation of all these things like Media Play and Blockbuster Video and Target and Kmart and Walmart and the big box stores, they tried to go into Portland and they said there's not enough non-places. There's not enough extra weird space of these non-neighborhoods to put in these big box stores. So Portland actually got stuck in the 90s. And that's why I live in Portland, because it's one of the only cities in the United States of this scale that didn't have the giant highway projects. Tom McCall from Tom McCall Waterfront Park teamed up with Jane Jacobs to get Robert Moses out of Portland, and then they diverted all of the funding that they had for the highway projects to rail transit. That's why we have a light rail system. So you have more of a placiness in Portland, which people are starting, at least the New York Times has really started to notice. So how do we become cyborgs? We have this idea of a second self that a lot of babies have before they're even born. And then they get born. I mean, this account, well, this is from 10 years ago, but it already has 4,000 followers. I mean, can you imagine living with this? Are you going to have your parents give you the password to this account when you're 10? I'm going to go find this account, see what happened. You know, when does your voice take over on a social network and your parents' voice cease if your parents are running this account? I talked to these parents and they said, well, we didn't want our daughter on social media because she was too young and she was 10 and she really wanted an account. So we made her the account for the family dog. And so she pretended to be the family dog on Facebook and would post pictures of the dog and be like, bark, bark, and would start to bark on everybody's Facebook walls. Bark, 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 you know, to get attention like a dog actually does. Very similar. And then one day, people got sick of it and they stopped responding with little hearts. And she's devastated. She said, why didn't they respond to me? And it was the first time that the parent had to explain. It wasn't explaining death, but it was explaining this weirder concept of this kind of in-between concept that maybe nobody really cares, but they were being polite to you. And was this sense of loss. And so after I heard this story, I started to go on YouTube and I started to follow child celebrities. The beginning, the middle, the height of the fame, but then I would follow their account after they fell off. And I started to talk to people who had this as a business. They'd be in their 30s and 40s. They would know all of the teenage slang. They'd live in LA. And they would bring in these kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, usually 13, 16, fly them out to LA, get them brand deals, work with them for their fame, which they know would only last 2 weeks to 3 months, put the money into a trust account that their parents couldn't get at all, that would mature at 18 or 21. And then the funding would run out and they would try to refer the kid to psychological support, but it often didn't work. And the kid would just be let go. And you would see on their YouTube profile them trying to get back that fame again and again and again, all these different ways. And so what does that even mean? What is this kind of second self that happens? That's my old second self there. I kind of started the Case Organic project as an art project 10 years ago to see if I could create a secondary self that was a little bit more outgoing than my primary self, which was really nervous and shy and not very social. I watched this Japanese anime about a person who created a very shy person that looked kind of like me, who created the secondary self that was very outgoing. But then the selves collapsed. They ended up having this feedback loop where they got more social. So in a way, I was creating a training thing to do what I really wanted to do. But this secondary self exists outside of yourself. And these used to be created. You would go on a chat and you would create who your identity was by your text. You could change genders and races. You could do whatever you wanted. You could be a dog. But you weren't tied to your real name. And until this, I wasn't tied to my real name. I was AI Case and Athena Powers and Takashi Solkervis, whatever I wanted to be. I ran forums. I was all these different identities. You could experiment. That's what you're supposed to do as a teenager, experiment with identities. But now we have a real name and we're tied to that the whole time. And everything that you do can be traced back 4 or 5 years. And when people don't understand that it's a secondary self that you're creating, that you can carve it, or you can leave out all those minute details and you just share your emotional state and that link that made you angry, then you're just feeding a machine. And I think a lot of social networks have made money because they have to be supported by advertisement. But before, when you'd have 30 kids or 10 people or 1,000 people running a small forum group, it was $100 a year to do the web hosting. You didn't get a lot of traffic because it was like a motorcycle forum. You might have 1 million users and that's great, but it's still really cheap. And you would have people knowing each other on the network. So if somebody threatened suicide or somebody was being bullied, everyone knew each other and they knew how to get rid of it. They could ban an IP address, a MAC address. They could hide forum groups from the person. They could make ghost forums. At age 13, I started making forums. And I had bullies, and I would just ban them or make secret zones for them to go into, and they thought that they were fully there. I made all this fake content. It was fun. I had to deal with them all the time. Then they started hacking it, so I had to deal with that. But on Facebook, when I saw people bullying each other, what do? You just send a support request. Hey, this person's bullying somebody. And some overworked, underpaid, chain-smoking content monitor who's looking at CP all day is terrified, and they just need to go home, and they kind of take it seriously, but it's so far away from them that they can't even understand. So my question is, does empathy scale, and can it? Or is it best left that we have some things at human scale where we're really connected to them? This used to be an interface for social grooming where you could send dopamine to each other, like happy birthday, or see the countries I visited, or hey, here's a cool app. But now it's something to make people upset because it's the shortest distance from your emotions to a post. Because the social networks are publicly traded and they have to make money. So we'll see what happens if we get a recession. But it's so funny how this is like, it has to grow as this organism. People talk about AI taking over the world, but publicly traded companies are a kind of AI that must grow no matter what. We used to have a lot of family-run companies. They don't need to grow in that same way. And so they're able to provide at a smaller scale things for their community. You could work there for 30 or 40 years. You could work there for 3 generations. Now you're lucky if you move to Silicon Valley, you get a $250K job, and then save nothing of it because you're eating Uber Eats and taking Ubers and paying $4K a month in rent. But at least you can go back to Idaho and do something. So we have a kind of presentation of self in digital life that a lot of people don't really, they present their emotions, like instantaneous emotions, instead of crafting the creative self that they want to be. And these kind of psychological effects of like +1 like and +1 comment create a cybernetic feedback loop that gets you to post for your network instead of for yourself. People are asking on Instagram, what can I do for Instagram? Not what can Instagram do for you? And you see, I started a tiny account where I was like, I don't care what I post anymore. I'm not beholden to posting this thing that if I get double-digit likes, like I'm valid. If you want to watch a great documentary, Doug Rushkoff created this documentary called Generation Like. It's on Frontline, so it's online, all of the original ones. But it was talking about all these kids in a group, and they said, well, I didn't get enough likes, so I don't know if I'm okay. That the idea of self-worth is measured at these like 30-second to 2-minute intervals, almost like a goldfish. You have to keep making sure that you're valid instead of this idea of a long-term goal of playing a musical instrument for 5 or 10 years. You get this thing online where you're seeing the best highlight reel of everybody else and the most extremes globally. And so it becomes less likely that you would build something up very slowly over time and reap those benefits. And then the internet becomes what looks like a playground but is really a factory. Where this was a great conference that I didn't get to go to, but it really talked about this kind of database games. Add something to the database and you get more points. Because it's digital, you might have accelerated rewards. Farmville was such a big deal, and I thought it was funny because on a real farm, you build over time something, or a winery, or something like that. You're building something over time that takes a long time to grow, but the rewards are like, hey, cool, now I can sell sheep. And now I have a really good sense of joy and a connection to my community, and now I'm selling cheese so I can have all these distributors. But when you live in a tiny little apartment or condo, and you're not given those rewards in real life, or they take too long, or they're out of sight, like buying a house, you end up getting shoved into these accelerated reward games that just give you the dopamine for these micro victories that can happen on a much smaller but faster scale. But really, we're just playing in spreadsheets of these level ups of +1 friend or +1 follower, and the social grooming and the psychological effects. But in the analog backyard, you're working with your body and your mind at the same time, which the Greeks really were into. They're like, we need to have a gymnasium, and we need to have something where you learn, an academy. And so you need to develop your body and your mind at the same time to get the most rewards. So now, instead of kids playing randomly for like 5 hours until their parents call them home and getting hurt, which is important, you have a bunch of kids living far away from each other, maybe 20 minutes away from each other, and they have their digital backyard, which Club Penguin becomes really interesting. There's this father that was having trouble talking to his son, and I said, well, your son plays Club Penguin. Have you ever just put on your headphones, pulled up your computer, made an account, and hung out with your kid in Club Penguin? You're not going to play ball with the kid in the backyard, but you can go and hang out and get rewards and go on slides in Club Penguin, and you bet your kid is going to talk to you for like 3 hours afterwards. So he's like, huh, that's interesting. I said, I'll show you. So I logged into Club Penguin and made an account, and this kid first had to prove that I wasn't just a tourist in Club Penguin. I had to prove that I was really good at these games, that I was almost as good as him, or maybe I could beat him. And then the floodgates opened. Blah, 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 this at school, I'm getting bullied, for like 3 hours. And so his dad learned to play Club Penguin and get good at it, and learned that he needed to be where his kid was. That this was the new backyard. And so if we're digesting as much information every day as a general in World War II might, and it becomes the norm, just like hoarding cats and newspapers, then we have this kind of information junk food, where it's not useful, it's not meaningful, it's not like reading an analog book and stimulating your brain up here and using this computer. All the stuff is done for us, and so we can just binge on it forever. The blue light disrupts our melatonin production and our eyes, and we don't fall asleep, and then we can't have REM sleep to digest our dreams and to refresh our operating system. And so we end up just binging on this. And this is an interesting study, because I think it was done a couple times. Right? The first time, I think there was a lever with cocaine, and the rat just pressed it until it died. And the second time, there's a study where some of the rats had friends, family, and activities. The other rats had none. The rats with none just pressed the coke lever till they died. The other rats barely pressed the lever. So then my question is, if we don't have any long-term meaning in our lives, and no human scale friends, family, and activities, no hobbies because our work fills up everything, and our family is based on stress stuff in between those moments of work, then is it easy for people to just press the button again and again to check email to get that tiny dopamine hit? And that kind of continuous partial attention, again, Lisa Reichelt, who coins lots of cool terms. Where do we get the time where we're not producing content for others? Where do we get the time in which we figure out who we are? Where do we get the time where we stare out the window and get bored and write in our journals? The Greeks have two concepts of time, chronos and kairos time. Chronos is the kind of 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. time where you have a meeting and then you figure out the thing that you need to do, but the meeting's over. And it's a Friday, so no one's going to get to the agenda items anyway. Or you go on a retreat, you figure out what your organization really needs, but the minute you get back, there's a panic, and you have to just be all hands on deck to constantly figure out putting out the fires. You even have the repetitive jargon in Chronos time. It's well, I'll loop back with you on that, and I'll do the thing. And it's just like the minute you get that, are you making anything new? Or are you just maintaining the norm? In a lot of industries, you need to maintain the norm. You need to create an assembly line to create a car. But are we in organizations that are just assembly lines? Or are we acting like kids and making stuff new? We don't need to be in what the Greeks call kairos time all the time. The time of falling in love, watching a sunset, forgetting about time, the time of really figuring out something that you can only do outside of an organization. But we need that at the edges so that we can bring that back. And that's what Xerox PARC and Bell Labs had. They had this sense of time with artists, with anthropologists, with historians, where they had either a larger view or a view to the side. They even had beanbag chairs in the organization because Alan Kay noticed that the programmers would interrupt each other when they went to the whiteboard to write. So he put in beanbag chairs because it takes a long time to get out of a beanbag chair. By the time you get out, somebody can finish their thought. And also, if you're going to spend that much effort to get out of a beanbag chair, you know it's important. You're going to think about, should I get out of this beanbag chair? Is what I have to say really that important? This is not correct neuroscientifically, but I like the analogy. So just in case you're a neuroscientist, when I was a kid, I would watch the computer defragment. Yeah! This was my favorite summertime activity. Is it hot out? I'll run the defragmenter. Oh, check out that giant file that got moved. Wow, that was like fireworks. Okay, it's going to take 4 hours. Okay. All right, it's a show. 4-hour movie. This is better than Star Wars. But then I was talking to my dad. I was like, Dad, how does memory work? And why can't I go to sleep at night? And he's like, well, you need to shut down all of your programs before you go to sleep. I was like, what? Okay. I was like, well, what process do I have running? He's like, you have your hearing, you have your eyesight, you have the vestibular sense in your ear that tells you whether you're upright or not. You got to turn that off. I was like, what? Okay. I was like 4 or 5. You know, my parents never talked to me like I was a kid. Like if I drew some clouds, they would be like, that's not what clouds look like. They're made of water. You have to watercolor them. What? I'm 3. Give me a break. I couldn't cry or complain. You're being like a 3-year-old. I'm like, I'm 3. Deal with it. But, so I would hang out with this thing, and then at night, I'd be like, I'm going to shut down my brain. So I would sit there, and I would, like, basically breathe, which now I know it's, like, transcendental meditation, and I would, like, breathe in this circular breath, and then I would shut off my vision, and so it would turn into kind of like the fuzzy screen of a TV. I would shut off my ears, which is really weird to have happen because everything gets loud and then it gets not. And then I would drop like 5 feet as the vestibular sense went off in my ear. And if I didn't wake up after that and didn't freak out that I just dropped because I always felt like I fell off the bed, I would go into conscious REM sleep, which was terrifying because all of your dreams are real. You're basically hallucinating in your own mind. But then I was noticing, I went to like 10 different schools as a kid, various reasons, but I would have oftentimes this dream at a place called a combination school where all schools that I went to ever were compressed into one building. And as I walked through the corridors, it would change into another school. And I was like, oh, so dreams are like memory compression. And because I am an only child and I hang out with more architecture than people, I'm getting to walk through the compression algorithm in my brain. Cool. So I was thinking, like, how do you make sure that you have enough sleep cycles? And then if you don't get enough of this with your own mind in the real world through journaling and doing your own compression, how are you making any room to be yourself? How are you actually getting to know yourself? Like, I feel like if I stay up too late, I'm not going through this. I'm not sorting through what I've done. And a lot of people that I know with anxiety and depression, they don't get enough of that time. It's so external. Their idea of who they are is so external that they don't have enough strength inside of themselves to say, okay, this is who I am. It doesn't matter what you're doing or how you're bullying me. I know who I am, and in 10 years, I'm going to be freaking awesome. So deal with it, and I'm not going to sacrifice my individuality so that I can look cool and stop being bullied by you. And if you're constantly connected to these things, you have a kind of augmented reality bullying. It follows you wherever you go. I tried to do this thing where I got a feature phone and I would go on a plane somewhere and I would just sit there without a smartphone for 2 weeks, so it didn't really work. But now I just by default put my phone on airplane mode, and I spent 5 minutes on my phone realizing that most of the alerts that I get are from machines and not from humans. So I went through the alerts and I turned most of them off. And I installed the Facebook newsfeed eradicator that replaces your newsfeed with an inspirational quote so you don't see it. The inbox when ready. And just tried to deal with it. The next talk I'm going to give is on calm technology, but one of the founders that's no longer with us, he said that technology, because he was doing this in the 70s and 80s when it was really expensive, he said in the future, in the 21st century, technology will cease to be the most expensive thing. The scarcest resource will be our attention. And how technology works with, makes, or creates our attention will make or create or destroy that technology. What can we learn from different industries and different pasts and indigenous knowledge about how to give information without overwhelming people? We need a kind of calm technology. That the original quote is not that technology should be invisible and embedded to all the walls and have AI monitoring all of us. That is a sign of a weak society if you follow Taoism. If you need to monitor your people, you're not a very good ruler. But the idea of an invisible technology is something that you focus on the task and not the tool. That a book is an incredible calm technology. The complexity folds in on itself. You can spill coffee on it. It still has the words. You don't need to update the interface. Don't need to plug it in. Yet when you open it, if the words are good enough, you dissolve into the book. The book becomes invisible because you're hallucinating that world. It's the least amount of tech to get the job done because it's working with this giant, mega, awesome VR machine that you've already got in your head that you just feed with bananas and stuff and it does things for you. It's pretty stable. It lasts on average 80 years. COBOL hasn't even been around for that long. So if you try to amplify the best of what tech can do and the best of what humanity can do, you don't get these situations where we're put on pause or you're trying to listen to one of those automated phone trees or you're trying to tell the Alexa something and you have to speak in a false American accent if you're in any other country to get it to understand you. Thanks. So what do we do now? Do you want to go back to sleep, or do you want to ask questions? I think my moderator is missing, so up to you.
No Empress. Amber, what does your company do important?
I don't have one anymore.
Oh, you don't?
Yeah.
I'm on the board too. I'll ask if anyone has any questions.
Great.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure.
So what are you doing now?
I work for the Institute for the Future, and we do.
We have a mic, and so
We're out of Stanford Research Institute. I've been around for 50 years, and I work on like 10-year forecasts. So instead of doing trends with signals, and it's actually a pretty sustainable way for predicting the future that they have.
One of the
Crazy. So,
ways that people are starting to use and identify, starting to identify different ways of doing that. Because I did see you do another presentation a couple years back on quantum technology, so I started removing all the ambient noise, and I kind of went one step further and started using, a Rocketbook. You know what a Rocketbook is? So a Rocketbook is just a notebook, right? Right, and you can reuse it, right? And if there's an app, so you can digitally search your notes after you've done taking them. So instead of having my laptop in meetings, that's a big distraction for me. I started using that in its place and still be able to digitally search my notes. And I actually took that from the conversation that you had given once before about trying to focus and be in the moment and not have all the distractions going on. So I was wondering, would that be kind of a, okay, all right.
should I give some feedback on that?
Please, just
That's great. First off, this thing is constrained, and it might be like this size, but it's like 100 miles deep, and it has all these different channels. And I really like, when I take my notes or plan my speeches or do anything, I start on a notepad first. But what I really do to think best is I just go on a walk, ideally for a long time. Like, I like to walk to the airport, I like to the suburbs. Like, we're talking 4 to 8 hour walks. Like, if I really have something to think about. And through that, I have to sit there and think, or like go on a walk with somebody, or a walking meeting. And then by doing everything else but sitting down in front of a piece of paper, then, and then I get a napkin. And then finally I regard the computer as a tool that I'm going to use to help me present those ideas as the final architecture. But all of the bones and all of the like most interesting thinkers and like most successful people I've met, not only are they just extending what they did as kids and are their true self and found a way to legitimize that and institutionalize that childhood, but they also just think for a really long time and then they put it on paper because this is this special kinetic learning that you need to have, and then they finally use the computer as a tool, and the computer is the last thing that they use. And it really changes things, because I could sit there for 3 or 4 days panicking about a PowerPoint. Well, like I did yesterday. I sat there for 2 weeks. I couldn't even open the PowerPoint file. I was on online shopping and stuff, and like, you know, putting stuff in shopping carts that I'm not going to buy. Doing everything I could. And then I finally went to the pool, and I was like, oh, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do. Went back, did everything in an hour, and then sent it to the client. They're like, yeah, this is great. Like, it was really simple. But I had to do something else that had nothing to do with the computer, and it was good. And like, those notebooks are great. There's another one called a Dynabook. That one's better because it's got a few more pages. How many? 35 pages. So you can have like a notebook and then erase it and get it, or like leave the page that you like. So it's nice. Like, this tablet is the size of a tablet, but it's also like based on like a slate from school, you know, when you would have like a farmhouse school with everybody, and then they would share these slates and they didn't have paper, so they'd have to write. There's the slate version. And then you would just erase and do the next thing. And you had to think within that space too, which was a nice constraint. That's how like some of the best mathematicians were discovered, because they would fit their equation into the smallest little slate because they didn't have enough room, so they had to think about it in their head first, and then they had to use it to offload some of that luggage. So yeah, it's great. It's hard because like I used to take notes on a computer a lot, but I lost that spatial thinking that you have with a notebook. Sometimes it's a little bit better, but only if you're doing like speed transcription or something like that. But yeah, thanks for bringing it up. I'm glad that's working out. Yeah. More?
I have a, I'm not sure this is a question. I'm going to speak out loud. I've been involved in technology since I was young. I'm basically an introvert. As I said to my wife one day when she wanted to go out in the evening, I said, it's not that I'm an introvert, I just don't want to be around people. And I'm not one who got involved with social media because the idea of sharing is not something I would go out of my way to do. What happens in this world to younger people who are like me, who the idea of sharing with others when everyone else around them wants to do this is taking place?
It's a good question. Well, then I have to ask, like, what gave you meaning? Did you have like small amounts of really deep connections with people?
Yes.
Okay, so that goes in line with like the people that I know that grew up and didn't want to share on social media. It's a lot harder for them though. I was really shy and nervous and knew that I had to have this extended self so that I could get where I needed to go, which is to level up a bunch of social classes. Because how I grew up was not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be like in high art and fashion and photography. You know, you get kind of born into that, where you get a nice camera when you're 5 and you start shooting photos and you have like fancy shoes, and then your parents make a call and then suddenly you're shooting for Chanel. Great. You know, growing up in a tech family without aesthetics and then being depressed because of it, but not knowing why, and then being snubbed by all the art people because I didn't, you know, just how many, you know, in the States you have invisible social classes where everybody thinks that they're a temporarily disadvantaged millionaire. That at any time they could win the lotto. Where you have heavily stratified visible social classes in England and academies to change your accent and to get up where you need to go. And it's not that I didn't like where I came from. I loved it. But I had this like need to be able to do something a little bit bigger And I didn't even know, and I thought, because I'm stuck in these random suburbs in Denver, where it's kind of a town in which it's not like it is now. But like my parents' friends were like gay and lesbian and trans and like single moms. And then I went to a Catholic school, and you bet we were rejected by everybody and super isolated. My only way, even though I was nervous, was to go online and create all these websites and identities and personalities and experiment so that I might connect with the people who are more like me than the people in my neighborhood in my city. So I had to do it, but I know that a lot of people that don't do that, they just have these small groups of people and they rely on each other. So they create this like small kind of local village, and it's fine. It's a different kind of life. In a way, it's more sustainable. Sometimes it's more meaningful. But I think the whole point of tech is not to have everybody get into tech. But I think in like a just democratic society, we should be able to participate in tech at the level that we wish and still be treated fairly and equally. And not be considered behind or a Luddite or too old or too young. I was talking in Madrid, and Madrid is fantastic. You want to grow old in Spain, for sure. When you get older, you dress better. You have more of a character. You have a beautiful house with a courtyard. You know how to make food, and you get to go to church and have lots of hangouts with your friends, to be totally stereotypical. But, I go there a lot, and I was talking at an energy company, and they're like, how do we deal with these little old ladies that don't want to do the mobile banking system and energy payment bill? And I was like, how about you make it so that you always have a group of, you just have a mobile energy system, and you drive around and go to all of the people that don't want to deal with it, and you do you bring the energy to them. So you drive around, you sign up, and and they have this friendly person that's going to come around. They're like, that sounds really expensive. And I was like, or you could make an entirely new, super friendly, easy to use system that would be completely unmaintainable and not work with the next browser update. Or you could just have some trucks and some friendly people and pay your customer service people well for the next 30 years, and they can be the interface between the technology, and they can be sweet and wonderful and keep these people company if they're alone. Also, at the same time, they could check on whether the person is healthy or not, and you could have a combination thing happening with health, and then you could have a mobile healthcare van. What could you do? Think about it slightly differently. But I think I always find it funny because people are like, I'm really into tech. I'm like, great. So as a programmer at 35 or 45, when you can't get promoted anymore because of rampant ageism in Silicon Valley, and the fact that you didn't learn the next programming language, and your brain is not as flexible anymore, you're going to take your winnings and go start a farm, or go down to South America to take ayahuasca to buy back the culture that you eradicated. So I keep seeing these people who are like, I'm going to buy a winery. And it's like, you've never done any physical labor in your life and never done a service industry job. Yet you want to deal with the original programming, which is like seeds from the ground and rain. It's funny how all of these tech people don't send their kids to tech schools, and they deliberately do not let their kids use tech for later. And you have all these parents in Palo Alto that are like making sure their kids deal with physical objects real well. But that's become a privilege. And instead, I really like Danish kindergarten. They don't have you go to school until 6, and the rest of the time they just have you play in the forest. And then you have these Danes that are like, they're pretty level-headed people, They're not, and then you have Swedish people that are like a lot more introverted, but you have just this incredible design vocabulary because of it. There's so much thinking going on before something is said. And you go to breakfast there, and it's totally quiet. There's kind of like the fika at 3 p.m. where you can talk to people. And people keep to themselves, And I think it's really important to just kind of think like, how do you make it so that everybody can participate and they're all really respected? And I think one of the things is keeping people in the same age group together all the time makes everybody really stressed out. And if you have like a variety of people, I really like the concept of Shabbat, because you've got no tech for like Friday night and Saturday, and then you've got people hanging out with different age groups. And if you want to play some MP3, you got to play it yourself with musical instruments, And And you eat so much that you like have to talk to each other because you can't move. All the ones I've been to have been a good time. But also this is like, if you just have a day or put your phone under a giant cast iron pan so it's really annoying to get to, just to think about what you're really doing, and then think about how when automation happens, the most important things become customer service. Then you can end up making a society in which all of that extra stuff, AOL still has 20 million subscribers or something. All of these extra people on the site are not considered, oh, they're Luddites or they're bad or we're going to leave them behind. They're valuable, interesting people in society that have a role to play, that are not shoved out to the side, but are a core part of society. Because we will all become that old.
Some of us are there.
Not yet. But yeah, we will all become old, and if we don't create a society in which older people are respected, we will bear the brunt of that misery that we created for ourselves. So I think it's really important to make it possible. And if older people can't use technology, it's technology's fault, not those people's fault. It's because the technology was designed poorly. When people say, I'm bad at technology, it's like, no, technology is bad at you. If it's good and understood with people in mind, with especially anthropologists working on it, and historians and artists, then you can have something that's a joy to use, that maybe gets better with age, that maybe is handed down from generation to generation, maybe it gets less megabyte downloads instead of more every time you update it. But I think we'll have to wait for like a recession for that to happen, where we lose funding and we have to be really good at what we do. Because there's no room for excess. It's an extremely long answer. I'm really sorry.
I'm just going to add one thing. 30 years ago when I was doing interface design, I read a book that I was doing that was called The Design of Everyday Things. It had nothing to do really with technology. And the main thing, I got numerous things out, but one of the things was is I wasn't an idiot when I went up to a door and I tried to push and I was supposed to pull. It was the door had been poorly designed. It gave me a whole new way of looking at the world, and same thing on interfaces. Other questions we have? Just a few more minutes, anyone?
So one more question.
Anyone?
You can ask anything you want.
The question was, where did you get that dress?
We like it.
Thanks. Do you want an honest answer?
Here you go.
Okay, here's the honest answer. Maybe we should turn that thing off.